Chapter 1. Childhood Among Trash and Dreams. On a sweltering April morning, in the heart of one of Jakarta's poorest slums, in a place known as Kampung Pahlawan, a little girl with blue eyes was born big and olive-skinned. Her name was Ayu Kartika. The name, chosen by her mother, meant beauty and dignity, two rare things in that forgotten corner of the world. Her mother, Sari Dewi, was a gentle woman with hard-working hands, and her father, Rudi Santoso, a day laborer who carried bags of cement for a few coins. They lived together in a windowless, 8-square-meter room with a perforated tin roof and rotting wooden walls. That house was rented for the equivalent of $30 a month, a huge sum for them, but a common price in the slums of Jakarta, where people pay absurd rents for inhuman spaces. In every corner of the kampung, you could hear fights, children crying, and old radios blaring dangdut. Girls were seen more as a burden. Many did not even reach middle school. Some were forced to marry early, others fell victim to abuse or human trafficking. But Ayu's parents refused to let her fall prey to this fate. Ayu learned to walk while navigating the dirty puddles and piles of garbage in the slum and the narrow alleys, with surface sewage and pungent smells. The little girl made her way among skinny cats and barefoot children. She often spent her days by her mother's cheap donut stall, watching the world hurry by, without noticing the little bit of life that was playing. Their home, if it could be called that, was a room with a narrow bed made of planks, a thin mattress and an aluminum pot that they used for both cooking and washing. He sometimes rained through the ceiling. When it started to rain, Ayu and her parents would catch the water in buckets, then joke that they have their own well in the house. Although they had nothing, Ayu had an insatiable curiosity. 4 years old, her mother taught her to count using grains of rice. 5. Her father showed her the letters in old newspapers he found on his way to work. Although his hands were calloused from work, Rudi always told her, "Words are heavier than cement." But the world was not kind to little girls like Ayu in the street. People talked about beautiful girls who were taken by rich men. Many girls in the slums stopped coming to school after the age of 10 or watched them leave one by one, and her mother's eyes showed fear. "You are not like them," Sari would tell her, hugging her. "You will get out of here." But for Ayu, everything was a mixture of reality and dream. She went to a neighborhood public school every day, where the teachers shouted more than they taught, and the desks were breaking under the weight of the children. But it was a place where books lived. And Ayu loved books. She studied at night, with an improvised flashlight, under a blanket. She wrote down unknown words on old newspapers. And in the morning, when other children refused to wake up, she was already in uniform, her hair tied in 2 ponytails, waiting with her school bag in hand, to go to school. As the years passed, her intelligence became impossible to ignore. To the age of 8, she had started writing short stories on the backs of cardboard boxes. She would hand them out to the younger children, reading them out loud, like a real teacher. The neighbors looked at her in amazement. "Rudi's girl is different," they whispered. But the difficulties also increased. When she was 9, her father was injured at work. A bag of cement fell on his back. She had to sit for months at home, and her income plummeted. Sari started working at night, washing dishes in a small warung. Ayu wanted to help. She started writing poems and short articles about her slum. She would put them on colored sheets of paper and sell them on the street corner for 500 rupiah each, the equivalent of a few cents. People laughed at first. Then they started buying them. Not out of pity, but because they were beautiful. Because they were true. And so, without knowing it, little Ayu had already begun the path that would lead her years later to write great truths in a world full of lies. Chapter 2. Dreams that don't fit in the slum. Ayu was 12 years old when she first realized that the world outside the slum was different. She had been chosen to participate in a creative writing competition between schools, held in a central Jakarta neighborhood. When she arrived there, she stood motionless in front of the host school building. Large windows, green courtyards, a real library, computers, seemed like another universe. The children were smartly dressed, had modern backpacks, and spoke English. Ayu felt that her old shoes and faded uniform betrayed her. But she remembered what her mother had told her. "Fear makes you small. You are big, Ayu." She wrote a story about a little girl who wanted to become a writer, but she had no paper, so she wrote her thoughts on dried banana peels. She finished the story with tears in her eyes. The next day, she found out that she had won first place. It was the first time someone from outside the slum had said to her, "You have talent." Her teenage years were a struggle between hope and reality. Her parents were still struggling to make ends meet. Her father could no longer work, his back hurt, and his mother was getting heatstroke more and more often at work. Ayu, while still a student, began tutoring other children in the kampung, teaching them to read and write. At 15, she entered one of the best public high schools in Jakarta, thanks to her score on the national exam. Every morning, she would wake up at 5 o'clock and walk to the bus that would take her to the other side of the city. She would arrive sweaty and tired, but always with a book in her hand. She was looked down upon by her classmates. Some would laugh at her accent. Others would tell her to her face that she would never get anywhere. But Ayu, far from giving up defeated, she began to write more and more. Diaries, essays, poems. She sent them to magazines for teenagers, and gradually, fragments of her work were published. She also received money for them, which she gave to her parents without blinking. When she was in her last year of high school, she learned about a full scholarship offered by the University of Indonesia for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds who demonstrate academic excellence and social involvement. Ayu applied with an essay titled, "The Kampung That Raised Me." She wrote about her childhood, about the misery and courage of Kampung Pahlawan, about lost girls and parents who struggle with despair in silence. The essay reached the dean's office. When she was called for an interview, the teachers recognized her. "Are you the girl with the story written on the banana peel?" Ayu was accepted. She received the full scholarship. The day she received the news, her mother collapsed her knees, crying and laughing at the same time. Her father, with his aching back, hugged her and said, "You are not just our daughter. You are the daughter of hope." Thus, at the age of 18, Ayu Kartika left the slum for the first time as a student. Not as a victim. Not as a runaway. But as a trailblazer. When Ayu Kartika first stepped onto the campus of a University of Indonesia, she felt like she was living a dream. The modern buildings, the student cafes, the multi-story libraries, all seemed from another universe than Kampung Pahlawan. She had a new backpack, received as part of her scholarship, but in her soul she carried all the weight of the slum, the smell of the sewer, her mother's voice, the silent hunger, the promise that she will not forget where she came from. She chose journalism because she knew that the truth could be sharper than anything sword. She knew what it was like to live in the lies and indifference of the authorities, to grow up in a place where it didn't matter what you knew, but who you belonged to. And she wanted to change that. With every word, phrase and title in classes, she was silent at first. Her colleagues looked at her as the girl with the social scholarship. But when she spoke, the teachers listened to her. She had a clarity of thought and a force of expression that could not be ignored. She didn't study just for grades. She studied to understand the world so that she could change it. In her second year, she began to write articles for the university's student publication, First. There were texts about student life, about the prices in the dormitories or the queue at the cafeteria. Then, more and more often, her articles took on the tone of harsh reality. She wrote about students without uniforms in the slums, about schools without toilets, about children who worked instead of studying. One of her articles, "Children in the Shadow of Jakarta," went viral on social media. Tens of thousands of people read it. She was invited to a local radio show to talk about inequality in education. But not everyone was happy. After she published a piece about missing funds from a government slum redevelopment project, she received an anonymous email. "Shut up, girl. Stop playing with fire." Ayu was scared. She cried. But she didn't stop. At 21, she landed an internship at Jakarta Suara, a respected but under-resourced local newspaper. She started as an intern, proofreading articles and serving coffee. But the editor-in-chief, a tough, eagle-eyed man, read some of her writings on her personal blog. He called her into his office one day. "Kampung Pahlawan girl. You have a backbone. Do you want a serious topic?" Ayu received a thin file titled, "Social Housing and Lost Funds." She investigated for 3 months. She spoke to people in the slums, she tracked down documents, she confronted officials. She was turned down, lied to, threatened. But she kept going. She wrote with anger, but with discipline. She delivered the truth like a punch on the table. The article appeared on the front page. "House Thieves, How the Dreams of the Poor Were Stolen." It led to protests, it led to investigations, it led to hope. When she returned home to Kampung Pahlawan, people came out of their huts, clapped their hands and shouted her name. Not because she had become famous, but because, for the first time, one of them had spoken, and the world had listened. That evening, her father brought her an old wooden box. In it were the newspapers he had kept over the years, with all her articles. "Your voice has grown, Ayu," he told her. "And with it I began. Let us dream too." Chapter 3. Truth Has a Price. After the article that shook the local government appeared, Ayu Kartika was no longer just the girl from the slum who writes beautifully. She had become a problem, name whispered nervously in political offices, a face recognized among protesters. Some praised her. Others hated her. No one was indifferent, and in the following weeks, she received more threats. Anonymous messages, phone calls in the middle of the night. When she opened the door to her house, she would sometimes find crumpled pieces of paper with handwritten words. "Stay out of trouble. You have a mother. Take care of her." One evening, as she was walking back to her dormitory, she felt like she was being followed. She ran to the campus entrance, her heart pounding. She said nothing to her colleagues. The next day she showed up at the newsroom with the same notebook, the same pen, the same determination. The editor-in-chief wanted to protect her. "You can take a break, you've done enough." But Ayu shook her head. "Then they've won. And how many more will keep quiet after me?" In the months that followed, Ayu continued to write. She published a series of investigations into how international aid for education was siphoned off through phantom NGOs. She interviewed teachers who had not been paid for months. She put an entire network of corruption that fed on people's naivety and silence in the spotlight. But with public recognition came isolation. Friends they withdrew. Colleagues feared she would get them into trouble. Her mother was called in for a talk by a man in power, who suggested she keep her daughter in check. One night, after one of her articles led to the suspension of a senior civil servant, her parents' house in Kampung Pahlawan was vandalized. The windows were smashed and the walls, in red paint, was written, "Traitor to the people." Ayu came home immediately. She hugged her mother, her hands shaking. "You can quit, Ayu," Sari told her. "I won't judge you." But Ayu looked at her with eyes filled with an eerie stillness. "If I quit, who will be left to tell the truth?" Soon after the attack, human rights organizations began to publicly support her. She was invited to give speeches, to attend international conferences. She received an award for journalistic courage. But for Ayu, the most important moment was another. One morning, in front of the editorial office, an unknown woman appeared, holding a little girl by the hand. "She's my daughter," he told her. "I read what you wrote. I'm taking her to school. I don't want her to be afraid anymore." Ayu cried silently. She understood that change doesn't begin when the corrupt fall, but when people choose to stop being silent. In all the chaos, in all the pressure, Ayu didn't get lost. She finished her studies with honors. She wrote a book, Jakarta, Between Truth and Silence, a collection of articles and essays about the fight for dignity, education and freedom. But she never accepted a position. She didn't sell out. She remained a reporter. The woman with the pen and notebook, who entered the forgotten corners of the city and brought them to the world. In Kampung Pahlawan, she built a small library for children, with the money she received from the sale of the book. She called it The Word That Never Dies. And every Saturday, Ayu would come there, sit on the floor, and she read stories to children. Like a girl who never forgot who she was. After her book became a symbol of civic courage, and the name Ayu Kartika appeared more and more often in newspapers and on television, many asked her, "When are you going to enter politics? Why don't you move to a safe place?" But Ayu smiled gently, almost nostalgically. "I don't want power. I want no one to live in silence anymore." Instead of leaving, she returned. With everything she had learned, with everything she had become. She returned to Kampung Pahlawan, where the dust was the same, but the people's gazes were different. Clearer. Bolder. The library she had started in an abandoned room slowly transformed into a real community center. Children came to read, but stayed to learn. Mothers came to drink tea, but stayed to ask about rights and laws. Fathers came to sit in silence, but they would remain discussing what a dignified life means. Ayu did not give them answers. He asked them questions. He taught them to question themselves. He taught them to stop accepting everything. A local campaign to rebuild the sewers was blocked by the community after Ayu helped to discover that the budget had been inflated 3 times. People protested peacefully but firmly. The mayor was forced to renegotiate the contract. Elsewhere in the city, 2 girls from neighboring slums applied for university scholarships, inspired by Ayu's story. They were accepted. One chose journalism. The other, law. Change was coming, but not with fire and stone. Tea was coming with a pen and a voice. With questions asked boldly. With dreams spoken out loud. One evening, Ayu climbed onto the roof of her parents' house. She saw the lights of the city, mixed with the smoke of the slum. Along with she was her mother, with tired hands but proud eyes. "You changed the world, Ayu." "No, mother," she said, looking up at the sky. "We just lit a spark. We changed the world together." The next morning, he put up a poster at the entrance of the community center. "We don't want charity. We want knowledge. And we take our future back ourselves." And so, from a kampung lost among the concrete and oblivion of Jakarta, a silent revolution began. With every child learning to read. With every woman saying no. With every man understanding that he has rights. And at its center Ayu, the girl with big eyes, with a soul full of wounds and light, who never forgot who she was and what a single word spoken with courage can become. At first, everything seemed small. A meeting with 5 women from a neighboring neighborhood. A discussion about inflated bills and broken promises. A teenager from Kampung Menteng who wrote poems about hunger in her family and the shame of wearing torn slippers. A young man from an industrial neighborhood who wanted to film the potholes in the street and post them on the internet. Ayu didn't tell them what to do. She just said, "Your voice matters. Your words can light a fire where there was only silence." And her voice multiplied. Within a year, 4 more slums in Jakarta had asked for support to set up their own community libraries. Young journalists began investigating corruption in infrastructure projects at the local level. Informal citizen groups formed, going to public meetings and demanding transparency. "What does it mean to be poor if you have courage?" Ayu had asked at a TEDx conference. "Being poor doesn't mean you lack intelligence, it means you lack opportunity. But a community that wakes up is a community that starts to create its own opportunities." The speech was seen by millions. The intimidation attempts did not stop. But now Ayu was not alone. When the Jakarta Suara newsroom was targeted with unjustified searches, dozens of independent journalists simultaneously published the censored articles. When a neighborhood leader was threatened for exposing the theft of public funds, hundreds of people protested in front of the city hall, carrying signs with Ayu's face and the message, "You can't silence us all." A former education minister, now retired, came to the community center in Kampung Pahlawan one day. He chatted with Ayu in the library. As he left, he said, "You've created more change from the bottom up than many ministers from the top have done, down." Ayu smiled at him. "Maybe because we, down there, have nowhere to fall anymore. Let's just get up." 5 years after writing her first article, Ayu was nominated for the Ramon Magsaysay Award, Asia's most important award for social contributions. She didn't win it, but she was invited to give a speech to leaders from several Southeast Asian countries. "I didn't come with diplomas," she told them. "I came with stories. With the names of girls who were abused and had no one to tell. With the cries of parents who pay rent from misery and silence. With the trembling hands of a mother who signs with her fingerprint because she can't write. You won't see these people in your statistics, but they are the real Indonesia." After that speech, Ayu received an invitation to join a national council for social reform. She politely declined. She stayed in the kampung, opened a training program for community journalists. He launched an online platform where people could report corruption anonymously. He organized summer camps for children from the slums, where they learned to write, to think critically, and, above all, to never be ashamed of their origins. One evening, after a long day, Ayu was standing on the roof again. The same sky, the same city. But Jakarta seemed different. Not because the buildings had changed, but because in dozens of kampungs, someone was reading. Someone was asking. Someone was writing. "Spark doesn't light the world," he thought. "But it can light other sparks. And maybe one day, there would be no need to shout the truth, because the world would already have learned it." Chapter 4. The Legacy of Broken Silence. When you build a movement on trust and truth, the most dangerous enemy is not hatred, but lies. Not the direct attack, but the poisonous murmur that creeps into your ears. Is Ayu really that clean? Where does she get the money for her projects? Maybe she's working for someone bigger. After years of uninterrupted activity, Ayu Kartika had become not just a symbol but a real threat to the networks of influence that had been operating silently for decades between ministries, businessmen and local clans. One morning, an obscure tabloid published an investigation with the title, "The True Face of the Cardboard Heroine." The article contained doctored photos, edited recordings and false testimonies that insinuated that Ayu had received money from outside to destabilize the system. Within hours, the news spread on social media. Trolls and fake accounts began to aggressively attack her. "What do we do?" asked the editor-in-chief of Jakarta. "Are we launching a denial?" Ayu looked at them calmly. "We will not play on their turf, we will tell the full story. With names, accounts, evidence." 2 days later, he published a bombshell article, simply titled, "When the Truth Becomes Dangerous." He presented who the tabloid's owners were, their connections to a previously investigated company, how they had lost public contracts following the revelations made by the community network. The article was picked up by all the major agencies. People reacted. The public support was overwhelming. But the strongest moment was not online in Kampung Pahlawan. On a hot afternoon, Ayu found a poster taped to the door of the library. It read, "You teach us to think. We do not forget." Below the message were the signatures of children and parents in the neighborhood. There were people there who they had known her before she knew how to write. They had seen her cry, work, and pass on what she didn't actually have in excess. However, the scandal deeply affected her health. Not physically, but spiritually. She felt for the first time that she couldn't take it anymore. That the wind was too strong, even for a flag that had always flown straight. She left for a few months. Alone, in a mountain village on the island of Flores. She read. She wrote. She was silent. Then one night in the warm rain, she dreamed of her mother, her hands covered with calluses, handing her an old notebook. On the cover it read, as it used to, "Words never die." When she returned, Ayu was no longer just a journalist. She was a symbol tested by fire. She set up an informal academy, the School of Silent Truth, where young people from all over the country came to learn how to tell stories that matter. No diploma, no grades, no career promises. Just the question, what world are you leaving behind if you keep quiet? One day, a 12-year-old girl from an unknown kampung sent her a letter. "Kak Ayu, I don't want to be like you. I want to be even braver. I want to not have to be brave at all, because the world will already be just. But by then, I have my pen ready." Ayu smiled. It was exactly what she had hoped, without daring to say it out loud. That her legacy would not be glory, but a generation that no longer accepted silence. When Ayu Kartika set out on her journey, she did not dream of marches, cameras, or tens of thousands of people. She only dreamed of a wooden bench, in a corner of the kampung, where a little girl reads a book and dares to dream. That was all. But the fire of truth, once lit, cannot be easily extinguished. One February, in the middle of the rainy season, several cities in Indonesia witnessed an unexpected phenomenon. Thousands of girls, mainly teenagers, came out in front of their local city halls, in silence. They wore white scarves and held handwritten sheets in their hands, life stories, complaints of abuse, verses about injustice, unanswered questions. No, they had no leader. They had no slogans. They only had their silence, loaded with truth. The press called them the Girls of Silence. When asked to inspire them, they all answered the same thing. Ayu Kartika taught us that it is not our fault that we are hurting. Ayu did not organize these protests, but she understood them perfectly. She sent an open letter, which went viral. "My dears, you are braver than I was at your age. Not because you shout, but because you stand. Oh, not let the world dress you in shame. Do not apologize for seeing injustice. When you write, when you speak, when you live with dignity, you are already changing the world." The government was forced to react. The Ministry of Education launched a national program to prevent abuse in schools. Network of volunteers, many of them former students of the School of Silent Truth, was called to help draft the new policies. Ayu asked for nothing in return. Just one thing, that every school in the country would have a story box, a box where students could anonymously write down their fears, injustices, and hopes. This became a reality in over 3,000 schools in just 6 months. One day, Ayu was invited to a university in Surabaya to speak. The room was packed. First, a teenage girl sat with her head bowed, holding a composition notebook. After the speech, she approached timidly. "Ayu, I brought you the stories from my village. Maybe you can make them matter." Ayu took the notebook, her hands trembling, as if she had received a treasure. "They already matter," she told her, "because you had the courage to write them." The Silent Girls movement turned into a national network of support, education, and mentorship. From Jakarta to Papua, the girls gathered monthly in libraries, schoolyards, and community centers. They no longer waited for heroines. They learned to become beacons for others themselves. Ayu began to write less often, but to listen more. Her voice had become a crown of branches under which other voices flourished. In a final page of her personal diary, Ayu wrote, "I lived to see how from a barefoot girl in a kampung a generation was born that no longer accepted silence. I didn't change the world, I just wrote the first line. And maybe in the end, that's what victory means. Not to be the voice, but to make room for others to discover theirs." Chapter 5. From Jakarta to the lights of another sky. Ayu Kartika had turned 30 on a rainy March day. She hadn't thrown any parties. She hadn't taken any days off. She had spent the day reading letters from the girls in the Broken Silence Network and answering them, one by one, with the calm and patience that characterized her. But one evening, in a modest office above the library in Kampung Pahlawan, her phone rang. It was an international call. "Hello. Hello, Ayu. This is Ranga Wiranothat. I don't know if you remember. We were colleagues at that civic forum in 2018. You were the speaker, I was just the student with the laptop and lots of questions." Ayu smiled. "Ranga. Yes, I remember. You were the one who asked me if truth had a fixed IP. Exactly. That's what I wrote on the cover of my laptop, and it hasn't disappeared since then. How are you? Where are you now?" "I'm in New York. I'm an IT engineer at a startup that makes software for government transparency. But, more importantly, I've never forgotten what you said back then. That democracy without brave people is just paper." There was a moment of silence, then Ranga continued. "Ayu, I would like to invite you to New York, a special guest at a conference we're organizing. It's called Truth Beyond Borders. We want to talk about civic activism in vulnerable areas. We want to be the main voice. Not a speech, but a global conversation." Ayu remained silent for a few seconds. She had never thought that her story could cross continents. "Ranga, thank you. I don't know if I deserve it, but I accept. Because not only my words will go with me. All the stories collected over the years will go." The preparation was not like in the movies with luggage and expensive dresses. Ayu put 3 essential things in an old backpack: a thick notebook with the stories of girls from the kampungs, simple shawl, given to her by her mother, with the smell of sandalwood and jasmine, a small black and white photo of her family when they lived in a 9-square-meter room. She bought a plane ticket from Jakarta to New York, with a stopover in Doha. She smiled ironically at the airport, looking at the glass buildings. "What a long way for a girl from the slum," she said to herself. But maybe the world needs to see the faces that don't appear in tourist brochures. The flight was long, 20 hours in total. During the layover, Ayu opened her travel diary. "I'm not going to New York to be important. I'm going to tell them that every child who reads by the light of a broken light bulb is important. That the truth is not a luxury. It's fair." Upon landing, the New York winter bit her cheeks. Ayu wasn't used to the cold, but Ranga's smile was waiting for her at the terminal, warm and sincere. "Welcome to New York, Ayu. The city that never sleeps. But maybe this time it will listen." Ayu looked up at the gray sky of Manhattan, with skyscrapers that seemed to stab the clouds. She tightened her shawl around her neck and said, "Let's begin. Truth has no time zone." The first days in New York were an amalgam of sensations. From the airport to the hotel, Ayu couldn't wipe the amazement from her face. The streets, the skyscrapers, the lights that flickered continuously. They were elements that seemed to have come out of another universe, a universe in which people had more than just words to express their dreams. They had infrastructure, resources, opportunities. On the first day, Ranga had accompanied her on a tour of the city. After showing her Central Park and Times Square, he took her to a small handicraft museum, hidden in a quiet corner of Manhattan. Ayu stopped at each exhibit, admiring small details, wooden drawings or ceramic objects, each with its own story. "When I was at home, I liked to look at the handicrafts in the market," she told him, in a dreamy voice. They seem to have a life of their own. That's how New York feels, too, Ranga answered. A place with a life of its own. People who come and go, but leave behind memories and stories, that's its magic. Ayu looked at the world around him with a combination of fascination and melancholy. It was hard to imagine that this place could be so far from the truth she had experienced in Jakarta. Here you don't need to say anything to be heard, she thought. You just need the opportunity to speak. The next day, Ranga took her to tour the Truth Beyond Borders conference headquarters. The building was imposing, with modern lines, everything clean and perfectly organized. Ayu felt like a child in a science museum. Everything was fascinating and incomprehensible at the same time. Before the conference, Ranga had guided her through the office and the networking area, where people from different corners of the world were passionately discussing innovative solutions for transparency and human rights. Ayu couldn't help but feel a certain frustration mixed with a vision of opportunity. In Jakarta, people talked about transparency, but they had so few tools to achieve it. Here in New York, transparency seemed to be a handy word. But she knew that the reality at home did not compare to the comfort of this developed world. Outside, on the busy streets of New York, Ayu paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The cold air. People moved quickly around her, each with a purpose, a clear destination. But she remained a stranger in their midst, with a completely different story from theirs. How are you feeling? Ranga asked, observing her silently. It's hard to believe that there are so many places in the world where people have everything they need. It's almost like we're in another time. In Jakarta, we're just trying to survive. Here, there are so many options. Ayu paused for a moment, looking at the hustle and bustle around her. But what do you do with all these options when you have no roots? When everything changes at the speed of light and you have to adapt? Ranga looked at her carefully, finally understanding the complexity of her thoughts. Maybe it's about learning to stay grounded. Although this city gives you the feeling that everything is moving fast, the people who succeeded were those who knew when to stop and look. Before the conference, Ayu retreated for a few minutes to a small cafe, with a corner full of books. She took a cup of strong coffee, the kind that reminded her of the smell of the streets of Jakarta in the morning, before the hustle and bustle began. She felt like a stranger here, although with each step she took on the city streets, she felt more and more like she was finding her way again. Her journey was not just a physical one, it was a journey of the soul, one that carried her between two worlds. Jakarta, with its poverty, corruption and pain, and New York, with its beauty, opulence and unfulfilled promises of an ideal life. And that cafe Ayu still felt at home, as much as she felt in Jakarta, because it had never been about the places she was in. It had always been about those who had the courage to speak and those who dared to listen. That evening, before the big event, Ranga accompanied her to dinner. Ayu had not eaten in peace for a long time, without the noise of the markets, without the sound of sirens, without the fear that someone might arrive with a message or a threat. How do you imagine the conference will be? She asked Ranga. I hope you will be heard as you deserve. You too, Ranga. Not just me, we all have a voice. You have long learned how to use it. With each step she took in that foreign world, Ayu felt closer to her goal, not to bring change to a place, but to change the way people think about the world. Chapter 6. A visit to the New York Stock Exchange. After the Truth Beyond Borders conference, Ayu and Ranga had a few days off before she left for Jakarta. Ranga invited her to accompany him to his office, located in the iconic New York Stock Exchange building, a place where money and power seemed to intertwine in an almost incomprehensible rhythm. Ayu could not contain her curiosity. When Ranga told her about his office, about the stock exchange he monitored, about the transactions he made, Ayu did not understand much. She imagined a place full of monitors, a silent chaos of quick decisions, and people speaking a language she did not understand. But now, when she had the opportunity to see it with her own eyes, she felt that it was another universe that she could only imagine through Ranga's words. The day began with a walk down Wall Street, in the middle of a morning that was slowly rising over glass skyscrapers. Ayu raised her head and looked at the huge buildings that pierced the gray sky, penetrating that world that she only saw on television screens. They were all standards of an economic power, but to Ayu, each building seemed like an untold story about the effort of people to reach impossible peaks. Here, in this area, the biggest financial decisions in the world were made, Ranga told her, noticing the expression of amazement on Ayu's face. And I thought the world moved on dusty roads and in front of wooden doors. Ayu smiled slightly, feeling the shadow of her village still accompanying her. When they arrived at the New York Stock Exchange building, Ayu felt like an astronaut stepping onto another planet. The automatic doors opened in front of them and led them down a shiny alley, and as they advanced, Ayu noticed people coming and going in a hurry, wearing impeccable suits and talking on the phone in languages she didn't recognize. They seemed to live in a reality where every step, every decision, every breath was tied to money. Ayu stopped for a moment and watched the employees move around her, their heads bowed and their eyes fixed on the monitors. Here, in the middle of a world where financial changes were decided in a fraction of a second, Ayu felt a striking contrast to the reality she knew. People who had no time for daily war, but who carried with them a colossal burden of economic decisions. Ranga guided her through that world that seemed infinitely different from everything Ayu had learned until then. "This is the main trading room," Ranga said, opening a large door. "Hundreds of millions of dollars are exchanged here every minute. It is where economic decisions for everyone from New York to Jakarta are influenced." Ayu entered the room and was almost speechless. Huge table with dozens of monitors and digital screens on the walls, transmitting financial flows in real time. As she watched, a sea of numbers, graphs and lines moved on the screens around her, like snakes that transformed into an almost hypnotic dance. Each stock exchange on the screen seemed to move from left to right with breathtaking speed. "It is incredible," Ayu muttered, her mouth dry. "It is like a huge machine that never stops." Ranga smiled and urged her to sit down. He showed her some of the software applications he used to analyze and track financial flows. He explained in simple terms how the New York Stock Exchange influenced markets around the world, including Jakarta. "You know, Ayu," said Ranga, "everything you see here is about predicting the future. This big machine has a very simple purpose: profit. But for many people, the same transactions influence lives. The lives of those who are not as lucky to sit in an office like this." Ayu placed her hands on the glass table and looked carefully at everyone around them. These people had a clear purpose: changing the world through money, through investing it. But what happened to those people who had no economic power? How were their lives changing? On their way to the office, Ranga stopped in front of an Art Deco ironmonger. "You know, Ayu, this whole system wouldn't exist without a continuous exchange between these people who decide what to do with their money and those who try to live day by day. Each one has a mission." Ayu quickly understood that no matter how different this place seemed from Jakarta, the essence of the world remained the same. People were looking for their place, each on their own scale, in a world governed by rules imposed by others. Before leaving, Ayu stopped at the window of Ranga's office. She looked out at New York, at the crowded streets and at the sea of people moving at their own pace. She felt small in the middle of this huge city. But at that moment, in that place, in front of this world of concrete and technology, Ayu understood something. The same heartbeat that gives rhythm to the slums of Jakarta is the same that pulsates here, in every corner of the world. "Thank you, Ranga," she said, staring wide-eyed at the office window, "because you showed me another corner of the world. And because you reminded me that change can come from anywhere." The day after the visit to the New York Stock Exchange, Ayu called her parents. Their warm voice from Jakarta had brought her a sense of comfort, but also of responsibility. Her mother, with a gentle and always concerned voice, always asked how she was doing, what she had learned and what she had done in that big foreign world. Her father, less talkative, but always with deep patience, knew when to be silent and when to ask the questions that matter. "Mom, Dad, I've been thinking a lot these last few days. Those here in New York have offered me a great opportunity. Maybe I can do more than I dreamed. Offer me more than just words. I can learn to be a stockbroker. I can understand how that world works. And use that understanding to help those children in our slum." Mother was the first to answer, after a long pause, her voice full of unspoken meanings. "Ayu, my love, all we want is for you to be happy. If you feel like this is your path, then follow it. But never forget where you came from and who you are. Don't let this world change you in a way you don't want it to." Her father, who had never been in a hurry to express his opinions, added quietly, "When you leave, don't look back with regrets. I don't know what you'll find there, but if you return to Jakarta, be better than you were when you left. You can learn all you want from there, but don't let that city steal your dream." Ayu felt that her parents supported her, even if they were afraid of the unknown. But they knew that they had a little girl in her who wasn't satisfied with little and who wanted to make a difference. Even when it seemed impossible, in the weeks that followed, Ayu began to prepare for brokerage courses. She studied online and learned about financial markets, investment strategies, how to read charts and make decisions in a world where time is precious. With each step, Ayu felt closer to her dream, to understand how the economic mechanisms that influenced the lives of those in her slum, those who lived on the fringes of the system, worked. All this time, Ranga was always by her side. Not just as a mentor, but as a friend who supported her. They shared their ideas, discussed their visions and heard each other in moments of silence. But at first, everything seemed impossible. She, a girl from a poor slum, and he, a boy raised in the luxury of Jakarta's skyscrapers. But, as they got to know each other better, Ayu began to see in Ranga not just a man from a different world, but a man who had the same dreams, the same fears and the same desires like her. Over time, what seemed at first a friendship out of a need for mutual support, turned into a silent love. They understood each other with their eyes, without words. Ayu realized that between her and Ranga there were no worldly differences, no differences in education or social status. They were both people with a common goal, to change the world. One evening, after a long day of studies and meetings, Ranga accompanied her to a small cafe near Times Square. While Ayu sipped a green tea and looked at the crowd passing in front of them, Ranga looked at her with a slight unease. Ayu, what will you do after you finish your brokerage courses? What are your plans for the future? Ayu lowered her gaze to the table, reflecting for a moment. I want to learn to use money to help those who don't even have the right to a job or a decent life. I don't know how I'll do it, but I think that here in this world, I can understand how to change things. Ranga looked her in the eye and smiled. And I think you'll succeed. And you know what? I don't think you need much more than what you already have, courage and a big heart. Ayu smiled back, and in that moment she felt that the bond between them was stronger than any difference that might have existed between their worlds. They had the same dream, and even though they seemed to come from different worlds, they had the same desires for the future. After that evening, Ayu and Ranga became not only lovers, but also partners in their mission to change the world in a world full of contrasts and differences. Ayu had learned that love does not take into account social boundaries, poverty or wealth. She and Ranga, each from a different world, had a common goal, to bring about change, starting with their own lives. Ayu knew that her life would never be the same again, and that the next step she would take would be steps towards a better world, a world that she and Ranga dreamed of together. Chapter 7. First Steps into the World of the New York Stock Exchange. After months of intense preparation, online lessons, and study sessions that often lasted until late at night, the day Ayu would appear for her job interview at the New York Stock Exchange was fast approaching. Although her heart was beating fast and she was no longer so sure of herself, Ayu knew that this moment was a step she could not take back. It was years of work, sacrifice, and fulfilled dreams that had brought her here. Now she was no longer just a girl from the slums. She was a woman with a vision and a clear purpose, to use what she had learned to bring about change in the world. In the morning of the interview, Ayu woke up long before sunrise. She chose a simple but elegant dress that made her feel prepared. She looked in the mirror, and a small smile appeared on her lips. This is my life now, she thought to herself, taking a deep breath. Arriving at the New York Stock Exchange headquarters, Ayu was greeted by an assistant who showed her the way to the director's office. The building seemed even more imposing than the day she had first visited it with Ranga. With each step she took along the impeccable corridors, with marble walls and ironwork golden, Ayu felt like she was stepping into something completely new. But at the same time, deep down, she felt like she was where she was supposed to be. The director's office was a large room with impressive views of the city, and the furniture was modern and elegant. Natural light poured in through the tall windows, and the silver hardware on the windows added a sophisticated contrast to the whole atmosphere. Behind an oak table, an elderly man with a sharp gaze and an imposing presence looked up from the file he was studying. He was the head of the New York Stock Exchange, Mr. Michael Larson, an internationally recognized businessman known for his rigor and attention to detail. "Good morning, Ayu Kartika," he said calmly, but in a voice that betrayed great authority. "I was waiting for you." Ayu felt a lump in her throat, but she answered with a firm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Larson. Thank you for having me." Larson took off his glasses and looked at her carefully. He was a man who seemed to notice every detail, From your body movements to the way you pronounce your words. He picked up his folder and handed a document to Ayu. I analyzed your results on the qualification tests. This is not something I see often. You achieved maximum scores in every section. Not just good. Maximum. This is extremely rare. Usually, only the best of the best manage to achieve this result. Ayu swallowed hard. She didn't know what to say, and her heart was beating fast. She knew she had worked hard, but to have this work recognized by such an important figure overwhelmed her. Thank you, Mr. Larson. I have worked hard and learned from the best. I believe I have a vision of this financial world and how I can understand it in depth. I have a desire to contribute my knowledge to make a difference. Michael Larson looked at her for a few long seconds, his expression unreadable. People who reached such high positions were often hard to impress, but Ayu felt that he noticed the sincerity behind his words. That is exactly what we are looking for. You have a rare ability, Ayu. It is not just the technical knowledge you have accumulated, but also the clarity with which you see things. Many people who want to work in the financial field are more concerned with quick profits than with the impact they have on the market and the economy. But you have a different approach, and that impresses me. Ayu did not know how to respond. With each compliment, Larson seemed to come closer to the essence of who she had always been, a girl from a Jakarta slum who wanted to change the world. She didn't just have the ambition to make money, she had the desire to contribute to a more just world. Larson continued, You've proven that you're not only extremely capable, but you also have vision. I propose that you follow a career plan within the stock market. You'll start as a junior analyst. But with your test scores and the determination you show, I'll give you the opportunity to progress much faster than most in your position. You'll quickly learn how to operate the financial markets, and in a few years, I'll open the door for you to a bigger place. Perhaps even a leadership position within the brokerage team. Ayu felt a mixture of amazement and gratitude. She hadn't expected such an offer. Her start at the New York Stock Exchange seemed now much more real than when she had applied. How could she, a girl from the slums of Jakarta, get here? Maybe her dream wasn't impossible to achieve. Maybe the world was bigger than she imagined. Thank you, Mr. Larson. I have no words to express what this opportunity means to me. I will do everything I can to prove that it is worth it. Larson stood up from his desk and held out his hand. I believe in you, Ayu. And I am convinced that you will make a difference. Not only in your career, but also in the world we live in. Ayu stood up, and as he shook her hand, he felt that that sliver of a dream that had seemed impossible to achieve a few years ago was now a reality. To realize that from now on, she was no longer just a girl from the slums of Jakarta. Now she was a professional in the heart of one of the world's largest financial exchanges. After meeting Larson, Ayu felt overwhelmed with emotion. She stepped out of the building and looked at New York City before her, the city that had been only a dream and was now becoming a place where she could build her future. She couldn't help but remember her parents, the slums of Jakarta, and everything she had left behind. But now she knew that no matter what she did, no matter how much she learned, and no matter how far she went, she would never forget where she came from. And she would never betray her dream of making a real difference in the lives of those who needed help.Ayu's first days at the New York Stock Exchange were like an intense, vivid dream. The imposing building had become her office, and the people dressed in perfect suits and with phones pressed to their ears were now her colleagues. Every morning, Ayu stepped into that glass world and steel with emotion, but also with determination. She had a small office, but with a view of Wall Street, and a badge that proudly bore her name, Ayu Kartika, Junior Market Analyst. The transition from life in Jakarta to the furious pace of New York had not been easy, but Ayu had adapted with amazing grace. She quickly learned the language of the stock market, trading algorithms, analysis strategies. She stayed up late, asking questions, taking notes, observing. In a world dominated by numbers, she brought a rare lucidity, a kind of balance between heart and logic. And her superiors noticed this from the first days. One morning, in the large briefing room, the head of the analysis team, a tough but fair woman named Martha Reeds, stopped her speech about market fluctuations and looked directly at Ayu. Kartika, do you have anything to add? You've been following the evolution of the green energy index, right? Ayu looked up from her laptop, surprised by the direct question. She gathered her thoughts and calmly answered. Yes, I have noticed a growing interest from European investors. If the pace continues, it is possible that in the next 2 months we will see a redistribution of capital from the traditional fuel sector to renewable energy. The room fell silent. Martha smiled subtly and nodded. Good observation. Short and clear. Keep going at that pace. For Ayu, that moment was a confirmation that she belonged there. Not because she wore the same clothes as everyone else, not because she came from a fancy neighborhood, but because her mind was brilliant, and her voice mattered. Outside of work, Ayu and Ranga had become almost inseparable. In the evenings, after long days at the office, they would walk through Central Park, go to quiet cafes, or look out over the city from the roof of the building where he lived. Although they were from completely different worlds, they complemented each other perfectly. Ranga was the calm, Ayu was the fire. He listened to her, supported her, and encouraged her without suffocating her. She gave her meaning, depth, and constantly reminded her of the values that mattered. One Friday evening, as they looked out at the illuminated city skyline, Ranga said to her, "You know what I think." "What?" Ayu replied, leaning on him. "I think you are exactly where you need to be. And this world is lucky that you chose to stay." Ayu smiled, and for the first time in her life, she felt that she was no longer running from the past, but bringing it with her into the future. However, despite her success, Ayu had not forgotten the promise made in her heart, that of returning what she had received. She began to save, sent money home, and even proposed a social project through which the youth of Jakarta could have free access to financial education courses. When she presented the idea to Lawson, he replied, "You have the soul of a leader, Ayu. And not just a leader, but a visionary." Ayu was beginning to feel that her true mission was just beginning. She was about to unite two worlds, the world of the forgotten and the world of the powerful, through science, integrity, and empathy. Chapter 8. The First Mission of Financial Impact. The days on the stock market passed quickly. Ayu had earned her place on the team, but also the respect of those around her. And one Monday morning, while browsing the charts on her screen, she received a short message from Martha Reeds, the head of the analysis department. At 10:30, in the boardroom. "Your first mission." Ayu felt a cold shiver down her spine. It was not necessarily fear, but the intensity of the moment. Mission. Not a test, not a simulation, a real mission, in the real world, with real money and consequences to match. The atmosphere in the boardroom was tense, and the walls. Screens projected complex graphs and real-time capital flows. The table sat people with decades of experience in the financial markets. Among them was Ayu, the young analyst from Jakarta, simply dressed but with sharp eyes and a sharp mind. Martha opened the meeting. "We have an opportunity in Southeast Asia. An energy conglomerate, PT Nusantara Energy, is preparing to list on the stock exchange. IT is an Indonesian company, but with international potential. The problem is that they have a dubious reputation in terms of sustainability and financial transparency." All eyes turned to Ayu. "You grew up in Jakarta. You know the culture. You know the terrain. You will lead the socio-economic due diligence. We're interested in the real impact on local communities. We need an honest, deep and fast analysis." Ayu nodded. She was ready. 2 days later, Ayu set foot on Indonesian soil again. Not as the daughter of a poor family in the slums, but as an analyst for one of the most important stock exchanges in the world. She was greeted with smiles by colleagues at Jakarta Business News, the place where she had started her career. In the following weeks, Ayu visited villages affected by pollution caused by the activities of PT Nusantara Energy. She spoke to poorly paid workers, to families whose water was contaminated, to NGOs that had been trying for years to attract the attention of the authorities. She collected documents, took photographs, filmed interviews, all with impeccable professional rigor. When she returned to New York, Ayu presented his report to the board. It was honest, direct and documented. PT Nusantara Energy has huge potential on the stock exchange, but the human cost is unacceptable. It exploits resources without respecting environmental norms and community rights. If we choose to support the listing without pressure for reform, we become complicit. A long silence followed. Michael Larson, the stock exchange director, spoke last. "Ayu, what you have done is more than a financial analysis. You have reminded this board that ethics must be part of any strategic decision. We will postpone the listing. And we will impose clear conditions for reform on the company." Ayu felt his eyes welling up. Not just because it was a professional success, but because he knew that, far away, in the forgotten slums of Jakarta, life was about to change. The case made waves in the media. Newspapers headlined, "Young Analyst from Jakarta Changes Policy at." New York Stock Exchange. Environmental organizations contacted her for advice. Students quoted her in articles. Some they called it the silent voice of the voiceless. Ranga, seeing the news, brought her flowers and said with a smile, "Of course, I'll have to get used to the idea of being the boyfriend of the bravest woman on Wall Street." Ayu laughed, but he knew she wasn't kidding. For the first time, a financial mission didn't just mean money and profit, it meant changed lives. And that was just the beginning. After the wave of success sparked by the report on pt.New Energy, Ayu's life seemed to have entered a new balance on the stock exchange. She was respected, and outside the office, she had found in Ranga more than a life partner. She had found an ally, a confidant, a man who understood her beyond words. Ranga was the kind of man who, despite living between glass and steel, had not lost his humanity. Raised in luxury, but taught by his mother to respect every soul, he felt drawn to Ayu's depth and courage. Many evenings, he listened to her talking about his childhood in the slums with a respectful silence. As if every word were sacred. On a fall weekend, Ranga invited Ayu to a small, picturesque town in upstate New York. Beacon. The copper landscapes, clean air, and tranquility contrasted sharply with the hustle and bustle of the city. "I want to disconnect for a bit. Just you, me and this crazy beautiful sky," he told her, smiling. During that getaway, they talked for hours. About dreams, traumas, the future, children, parents. Ayu confessed her fears, the fear of failure, of being perceived only through the prism of success, not as a woman, as a daughter, as a human being. And Ranga, without interrupting her, just took her hand and said, "Whoever you are tomorrow or in 10 years, I still want to be with you. Not for what you do, but for what you are." Ayu felt how a part of her, perhaps the most insecure, calmed down. She was not alone. A month later, on the roof of their building in Manhattan, Ranga placed a blanket, 2 glasses of hot tea and a small velvet box. The sky was clear, and the city lights looked like stars descending to the earth. "Ayu, my life has always been predictable. Good, comfortable, but lacking fire. You were the fire. You brought meaning, you brought direction. And I want to give you not a gift, but a choice." He opened the box. Inside was not a ring, but 2 plane tickets. New York, Jakarta. "I want to go there. I in your place. I want to propose to you in front of your mother. Because you fought too hard to leave your past behind, and I want to embrace it together." Ayu teared up. Not for the gesture, but for the wisdom in it. He didn't offer her luxury, but respect. Not promises, but action. "Yes, we're going," she said, her voice trembling but firm, and the following weeks, Ayu began to prepare her steps for a life together. They talked about how they would manage their careers, about what it would mean to have a family, about possible cultural difficulties and about their role in society. They didn't run away from difficulties, they planned for them. And in this whole process, their love didn't become a fairy tale, but a solid, sincere, mature construction.